I'm going to be talking to Pat Hufnagel-Smith, who is the head of Creative Links International and author of a study for the Transition Accelerator called Assessing the Workforce Required to Advance Canada's Hydrogen Economy. So welcome to the interview, Pat.
Thanks for having me, Markham.
Well, I'm really interested in this because there's been a lot of talk about what happens to displaced oil and gas workers in Alberta, for example. Can they go over and work in the solar industry, the wind industry, the hydrogen industry? And are their skills transferable, that sort of thing? And so I'm very curious to know what you found out about what kind of a workforce we need for hydrogen. Let's start with an overview of your study, please.
Sure, absolutely. So the Transition Accelerator commissioned me to do the research to understand what is the workforce, required by occupation, the kinds of skills and knowledge that's going to be required to advance Canada's hydrogen economy. And so the deliverables associated with this project is certainly a report that identifies those that workforce, as well as some potential pinch points that we need to think about in terms of where we might find there are some challenges in terms of accessing the appropriate labor, as well as where might some of the opportunities be. And so that sort of really is the report. And I really have to give the Transition Accelerator credit for doing this work, because often as we're innovating and evolving a technology, the workforce isn't always top of mind. And so, the fact that they were so proactive around this was, they should be congratulated for doing that. And then I do want to mention too, Markham, the second deliverable associated with this project is what we've called a hydrogen workforce assessment tool. And the reason it was developed is because the way we see hydrogen economy advancing across Canada is really what's called a hub approach. So, jurisdictions are going to draw on, their strengths when it comes to how they might produce hydrogen, where demand might be. And so the tool has been developed so that a user can really hone in on workforce requirements for their particular jurisdiction or, their particular hub. And so, that's what how that tool has been developed. And then finally, I just want to say that we started this work looking at where is the current or near-term deployment within the hydrogen economy. And so we really see these documents as being living documents, in that as innovation continues and technologies become more commercialized, these tools and this report is going to need to be updated, to kind of just keep up with, how the economy's evolving.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the workers that are required. So based on the executive summary that I read, you need workers to produce, handle, and transport hydrogen. You need workers to create the ecosystem around hydrogen. I would assume a lot of that is supply chain. And then workers to advance innovation, because green hydrogen electrolyzers are not economic yet. So there's a lot of work going on there. Blue hydrogen and other colors of hydrogen are, but there are issues around carbon intensity with those. So this is an industry that still needs a fair amount of innovation. So what kind of workers are we talking about?
We're talking about workers that come from across the full spectrum of occupations, post-secondary requirements, certifications required. So, engineers, trades, technologists, technicians, truck drivers, geoscience professionals, digital occupations. And that's maybe one of the things that's so exciting about this particular pathway to net zero, is the broad range of occupations that are required. And then, as you said, there are, skill sets and knowledge that's going to be needed just to ensure that the pace of change is at that desired pace. So, things like business development and commercialization specialists that really help to create that market pull, stakeholder engagement and communication specialists that help, sort of the general public understand hydrogen and build some confidence in the technologies that are being implemented. And we can't talk about any kind of development without, the inclusion of Indigenous relationship specialists, because certainly as the hydrogen economy is developed, it's going to, it is developing projects where Indigenous communities are partnering, even being founding partners in some of these projects. So that skill set is needed broadly as well.
It sounds like this is a very technical kind of industry. Now, in oil and gas, you could get a job on a rig and, you high school education or less, and you kind of work your way up in the industry, and there was opportunity for advancement. It sounds like this industry, more technical aptitude, skills, and training certification are going to be required right from the beginning. Is that a fair observation?
I think it is, although I would say, the oil and gas industry is very technical as well in terms of its need for engineers and geoscience professionals, and those occupations are also needed to advance our hydrogen economy. I mean, CCS, for example, carbon capture and storage, is going to leverage that subsurface drilling, well service occupations as well. And so, and we need truck drivers, for example, because not only are they critical to building the demand pull, because we're looking at hydrogen as a pathway to decarbonize, freight and truck driving, transportation. But also right now, trucks are the major way of getting hydrogen supply to hydrogen demand. So we really need the full spectrum of occupations.
How are we going to train up and educate the workforce, whether they need retraining, upskilling, whether they need to be, technical training, right out of high school? How are we going to do that?
Well, I think it's really important, Markham, that when we look at developing the workforce required, we're doing it in alignment with how the hydrogen economy is being developed. And so I think, initially, as we maybe see hydrogen replace, or we see fuel switching, that kind of stuff, as, we move away from diesel or, other kinds of fuel sources and use hydrogen, I think what we need to do is also transition the workforce along with that, transition to hydrogen. And so I do think, because there's such a solid foundation of skills and expertise already in our labor market, that I think we're going to see, shorter term courses, micro credentials, or maybe boot camps, work integrated learning. I think we're going to leverage those kinds of opportunities to really help workers adapt their existing expertise to also work in hydrogen. I think over time, we'll see, post-secondary institutions and that kind of stuff build more hydrogen specific kinds of courses. But, as we sort of facilitate this transition, we're going to want to bring that, existing skills and expertise along with us.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the prominent role that Indigenous communities will no doubt play in the rise of the hydrogen economy. And that raises the question of a sort of a just transition strategy attached to this. I often hear, that as people lose jobs in the fossil fuel industries, whole communities and the workers can be sort of transitioned over to supply industry, up and coming clean energy industries like hydrogen. How does just transition and workforce development fit into a just transition strategy?
Yeah, I think, there's lots of sort of different definitions of what a just transition might be. So maybe just thinking about, the perspective that we've taken in the report is a just transition is, one in which we're building a well-functioning labor market that is equitable, inclusive, diverse, but also optimizes the skills and experience that already exist within that labor market. And so that's key, to your point in terms of understanding, how do we bring, workers that are impacted by energy transition or the advancement of hydrogen along with the development of the hydrogen economy. And again, part of it is because there is such a vast broad range of skills required, that opportunity is there to leverage. Again, the traditional energy sector offers us a lot of solutions from a workforce perspective going forward, but it doesn't happen, automatically. We really need to be strategic in terms of how we do it. And so the report offers a framework for advancing the workforce and paying attention to all those details or characteristics that we would want to see in a just transition. And the framework really mimics or leverages the Transition Accelerators framework for advancing the hydrogen economy as a whole. So it really speaks to how we need to align bringing the workforce along with the other transitions that we're making to advance hydrogen across Canada.
Well, Pat, thank you very much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Markham.